Okay, shall we start?
Let's do this.
So, Patricia, I really am so happy to talk to you today. I'm really curious about asking you all kinds of questions on overachievers, overthinkers, perfectionism. It's really a cool subject to talk about because for years I thought I'm not really a perfectionist. I really don't get the whole perfectionism until I dove into it, and then I thought, oh, but maybe I am. Maybe there are things that I can learn about this subject that is interesting for me to dive into. So I think many people think they might not be struggling with perfectionism, but then they really are. So I'm really, really looking forward to having this conversation with you. But let's first start with introducing who you are, and no one can do that better than you yourself. So I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll start with the questions. And
Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me and making the time to chat. I just want to say also that I'm very humble and very appreciative to have this opportunity with you. I'm very impressed and inspired by the work you're doing. I can see how much you put passion and commitment in the programs you are developing. So it's really, really sweet to have this conversation with you. I am located in San Francisco, California, in the Bay Area, and my clinical work is focused on acceptance and commitment therapy for all types of fear-based struggles like perfectionism, procrastination, phobias, performance anxiety, indecision, uncertainty intolerance, OCD, you name it. I do think that when our lives are dictated by fear, anxiety, and worries, we are stopping our authentic selves and we narrow our behavior, and our lives and relationships also shrink. And I am super passionate about showing my clients how learning different skills from acceptance and commitment therapy or affective science can really expand our lives and help us to build a relationship with ourselves and a relationship with others and do things that really can be impactful in what we do. So basically, that's what I do every single day. I am teaching active skills to do what matters instead of living by fear or doing things based on fear, anxiety, and worry. And I work with clients who are primarily overthinkers and overachievers, people that are pushing themselves really, really hard, working always above and beyond. And as you were mentioning, one of the challenges that we do have is that when people think of perfectionism or striving behaviors or high achieving, we're thinking only about career or academic performance. But if we can step back a little bit, the way that we understand perfectionism these days is that people are really scared of making mistakes. People are petrified about being a failure. And people have this strong attachment to rules of how things supposed to be or how others supposed to be. So these three things, my fear of making mistakes, this fear of being a failure, and this attachment to rules of how things supposed to be can apply to every single area of my life. It can apply to how I look at my body. It can apply to how I relate to food. It can apply to how I am parenting my kids. It can apply to my friendships. It can also apply to career or even my spiritual life. So the myth is that it's only for career academic performance, but actually not. I can be afraid of my kids misbehaving and that behavior being a reflection of my job as a parent. I can have rules about what I'm supposed to eat in the service of being healthy, or I can have rules about how I'm supposed to look. Or I can also have this fear of failing as a friend. And then what I do to manage that fear, I go into a lot of placating behaviors. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to say no because that will prove that I'm a failure. So again, it's important to know that behind perfectionism, there is these three processes: fear of making mistakes, fear of being a failure, and this strong attachment to rules. And that apply to all areas of our life.
That's interesting. I just now today come from doing a training in a business context, and we had like 5 minutes on the phone right before a few weeks back, like, okay, can we just look into, I have this team and this is going on, and could you do a training? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, done it tons of times, it's fine. So I prepared something, and then I came over there and today, and they said, well, let us introduce you to our management team. And then I just got like this whole more in-depth story that really needed something different than what I presented or what I prepared for. And I've done this so many times that I really am not worried about making a mistake, or, you know, to underperform or to be not good enough. And so in that sense, I can even be like sloppy. I can be relaxed. I'm like, oh, but this will be fine. Just, you know, give me a minute and I'll connect to the group and we'll go somewhere with this that will be meaningful for everybody. I'm fine. But if I'm not good enough to friends of mine, or to habits that I have that I want to change, I can be very strict to myself. And that's where, for me, overthinking comes in.
Yeah. I think you're tapping into something very important, is that these fears of making mistakes, or these fears of being a failure or not being good enough, are natural experiences, but how we respond to them can become a pattern of behaving that can be really unhelpful to us. And as you were saying, in some areas we can be, more relaxed, right? But in other areas of our life, we are petrified at the idea of not being good enough. And the challenge is that the way that we manage those fears is by overdoing, working harder and harder, avoiding saying no, avoiding making a decision, anticipating gloom and doom scenarios. We get scared about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. So I think that it's our response to these natural internal experiences that really can lead people to engage in very unhelpful patterns of behavior. And that's the difference, right? One of the things that I notice with my clients is that my clients, Anik, they were told hundreds of times, let go of your standards, you're working too hard, don't do it this way. And they were so offended by those messages, because what people didn't realize is that they deeply care. They deeply care about what they are doing. And of course, they want to do things right and perfectly. So in my work, I clarify that when we are doing the work and we're practicing active skills, it's not about let go of those standards, because the message comes here and goes there for them, right? Comes to one ear and goes to the other ear for my clients. It's really about distinguishing if you are doing things that work in your life, or you are doing everything you can to manage the fear of being a failure. It's like you're playing the workability game, where you're playing the game of doing things right and perfectly 24/7. So I think it's about teaching the skills for people to find their seasons in their work and their own rhythms, right? Because the frame that I hold is that I think that there are some people who are prone to deeply care, because they care. Of course, they want to do things right and perfectly. And I do believe that it is important to make a space for that, for them to be who they are, radically accept who they are, not who they wish to be, and to find their seasons and distinguish when you should push yourself a little bit more and when you should let it go. I think it's a matter of discrimination sometimes, right? And as you were saying, in some areas they do it. In some areas they may let things go. They may be okay with things being a little bit sloppy or getting behind. But it's in the other areas when there is this more rigidity and more this strong attachment to how things are supposed to be, that it's important to use active skills to find a season, to find a rhythm. So I think when we're learning to practice acceptance, when we're learning to know that there's a strong urge to work harder and harder, it's helpful to ask ourselves, okay, what's driving this? Is this because I'm really working hard to avoid being a failure, or because I deeply care about this, right? And it is going to be workable or not. So I think these questions that promote self-reflection can help us to discriminate when I do what, versus just going all the time with working harder and harder, more and more, and trying to pursue better and better. Because all those strategies fundamentally are trying to manage and avoid this natural feeling we're going to have at times of not being good enough, or this fear we have about being a failure or making mistakes.
Yeah, I for me, the way to discriminate if I am is often when I'm irritated. Like when you point out to me that I am working too much, or that I should be doing this or that, or, you know, suggestions of doing things differently, or my husband who is saying, you know, you're not home enough, all that stuff. And I get frustrated or like a little angry at him for saying that, then it often has to do with me not having a choice. I have to work a lot. And yes, I care about my work deeply, but in that moment, it has to do with striving for acceptance from other people, and not just me loving my job and caring about my job. For me, that's where the difference is. Is that the same for everybody?
Yeah. I think what is beautiful in what you are sharing is that it is important to tap into this internal experience. Like in your case, is feeling a little bit irritated, right? Like having some irritability. For other people, maybe like this rush, like I have to do more, right? I have to do more. I think it's important to find our cues, right? When we are feeling like I have to do more and more, or when we get irritated, why is it upsetting? And then step back and really check what's driving here. What's behind this? What's behind this noise? And in the case of perfectionism, what it is many times is really this fear that if I don't do X, if I don't do X, this project will fail. If I don't do Y, my friend will reject me and they will think I'm not a good friend. If I don't eat as I supposed to, then I'm not going to look according to these standards. So I think look into this urge to do more and more, to this sense of irritation, to this fear that may come. It's quite visceral for people, right? There is different types of fears that we may have. I may be afraid of saying the wrong thing in this podcast. I may be afraid of not doing the right thing with my client the next couple of hours. But when we're talking about perfectionism, this fear of not being good enough and this fear of making mistakes are quite intense, right? So I think tapping into that, helping people to recognize when they're showing up and really checking what's driving this, what's really driving this. There is a difference between pursuing what matters to us, as we were talking before this interview, without attachment to the outcome, versus pursuing what I care. Like I need to have this outcome. I need to have X number of things. I need to make sure that my kids behave perfectly. I need to make sure that my body looks in this particular way. With perfectionists, people sometimes don't discriminate whether they're attached to the process or to the outcome. And that is very, very important, right? To check what are you chasing here? And then what are you chasing in the service of what? To minimize these fears of not being good enough, or to your values and do what matters without knowing how it's going to be. So that's another level of discrimination, looking what we're chasing.
Yeah, I think that's while I was having this team coaching today with the management team, I was like, many of them talk about, I feel insecure and I don't feel self-confident, and which was quite strong for them to talk about this openly. I thought it was really courageous to do so, but I think many people don't even realize it, and they just say, yes, but I want my house to be clean because I think it's important, or we have a lot of pressure at work, so I have to get this or that done because otherwise. But so many people who, for me, and I really want to know what you think about this, is many people are who are in this lane of wanting things to be perfect, they're never done. They are always, I call it on. They have like this button, they're always on. And so they can never let go. They're always thinking about how to strive for more or better, or yeah. And I think that's very inspiring. And your judgment isn't really, it's clouded when that happens.
Yeah, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting to be in our heads all the time, right? Yeah. So the way that I think about this is that when there is this fear of not being good enough, or fear of being a failure, or this strong attachment to how things supposed to be or how others supposed to behave, we do all types of things. Sometimes, you're going to see a lot of procrastination. I postpone making decisions, and not just big decisions, small decisions like what's the color of the shoe I'm going to buy? Should I call my friend in the morning or should I call my friend in the afternoon? Did I send the right email? Or there is a lot of rumination that looks like problem solving, right? Or there is a lot of research on internet. What's the best car I'm going to buy? Trying to make the best choice. But all those thinking strategies, if we don't pay attention, they're really masking all these processes behind perfectionism. So I think one of the things that happens to based on one of your questions, people don't realize that when they are stuck in their heads, when they're overthinking, sometimes that's a way in which they are managing and avoiding sitting with this fear of making mistakes. All that rumination, all that indecision, all that fears of regretting making the wrong choice, all that information seeking they are doing, it could be driven by this fear of not being good enough, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's why sometimes people don't realize that procrastination or procrastinating behaviors can be linked to this fear of not being good enough. People may think, but my goodness, Annick, she's such a high achiever and she excels and she's really dedicated. I don't understand why she's postponing this project. And what happens is that if you are concerned about not being good enough, or you feel insecure, or you are concerned about people will think I'm a fraud, you may avoid delivering some projects because they're not good enough and people will catch you, right? So I think there is a lot of times in which procrastinating behaviors are also part of being a high achiever and an overachiever and a person that excels, because you want to make sure that you will have the perfect project or the perfect outcome. But again, we have to check what we're chasing, what's driving this here. It's my attachment to the outcomes, or it's really my values-based behavior, right? So I think that's that perfectionism can be quite tricky, and I think that's why it goes under check many times, because it has many micro behaviors that are responses to this fear of making mistakes or this fear of not being good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite interesting what you're saying there. So actually, that was what I was wondering about. So you are like the main group of people that you're seeing are overthinkers or overachievers, and what you're saying is, whether it happens in your mind or it happens in what you do all day, like the busyness of your actions or the busyness in your mind, often has to do with not being good enough.
I think most of the times I will say yes, right? Most of the times I will say yes. That the challenge with overthinkers and overachievers is that I think it's a group of people that have dynamic minds, right? They are sometimes problem solvers. They want to innovate. They deeply care about what they are working on, whether that's something about the environment, what's about raising their kids, whether it's about how their spiritual life. They genuinely deeply care. The challenge is that they don't realize how often they are getting stuck in their heads, and they are trying to use all these thinking strategies to manage their own feelings, to manage their own fears. And I think that's why perfectionistic tendencies many times may look like benign, but they can be very paralyzing. When you're doing everything in your life to make sure you're not a failure, could you imagine that if every single day you're pushing yourself to work harder and harder, more and more hours and more hours, hoping that one day you won't feel that you're not good enough, hoping that one day you will feel, okay, this perfect human being. You're chasing something that is not unattainable. We're chasing something that is not possible for any human being, because no matter what we do, how old we are, or where we live, we are going to experience some doubts about, the things that we are, whether we're lovable or not. I think to be human is to be insecure. I think that's just the nature. That's the nature of our existence. And in the work of perfectionistic behaviors, I think it's important again to learn to radically accept that we do have a dynamic mind and that we are going to experience some self-doubts. Mm-hmm. That while we're doing what we care about, our mind is going to tell us, watch out, are you sure that's the case, right? Are you sure? And we're going to feel insecure. That's just part of the human experience. This sounds a little bit easy when I am saying it, but I know it takes a lot of work and courage to make room for this part of us that feels insecure, doubtful, that feels that we're not good enough, and still take action. Mm-hmm. So I think within ACT, right, one of the skills that we use a lot is diffusion. It's about noticing and label this story that is telling me that I'm not good enough. Learning to notice when it's showing up, making room for it, and really checking with ourselves, saying, what's driving this here? Is it the story or is it my value? And what is important for me to respond, to do that right now? So even in that process, I think that ACT also teaches us self-compassion skills, to be gentle with ourselves. When I realize that I'm chasing a particular feeling or a particular outcome, I could be extremely mad with myself and say, oh my gosh, Patricia, here you are doing it again. But reality is that, of course, my mind is going to push for that because I deeply care. When I acknowledge my proneness to deeply care for things, and I realize that, yeah, this part of me, this story is going to ask me to work harder and harder. In some way, I can see that it's not because I'm a bad person or because I am broken or I need to be fixed, but because I acknowledge I have some proneness to deeply care. Of course, I want to work harder and harder. Even that self-reflection in some way helps us to be much more gentle with ourselves, because we're radically accepting ourselves. We're not trying to be someone we're not. I am not trying to be that person that people will say, let go of your standards, just drop it, don't work too much. I am acknowledging that there is this part of me that actually has this tendency to work a lot, to do more. And I just want to be caring with that part and see what's driving this. What am I chasing here? Mm-hmm. So I think that could be helpful to hold that frame.
Yeah, I do think that what you're saying is very helpful. I had a period in my life where I worked 75 hours, 80 hours a week. And I recall that people around me were saying, that's not good for you. Don't work as much. You should have a life apart from your job, stuff like that. And for me, I really didn't feel understood. And somewhere inside of me, there was this part saying, but it is not good for you to do this. But the other part was just really drawn to succeed. And when you put it like that, it really sounds like there is a value at the basis of it. It is, I'm definitely prone to care deeply about the things that I do. And I guess that's the entrance. And then there is this, the part where deeply caring is mixed with wanting to be good enough, with being accepted, with being shame-free, being guilt-free. And those are what I've noticed. It actually reminds me of something that happened to me years ago when I started this training company that I sold in 2020. In the beginning of it, I was like working and working and working. It was never good enough. And then I used the ACT model that we're talking about, and it has 6 processes. And I looked into it and I was like, okay, yes, I'm not often enough in the here and now. I can do meditation or, just whatever. I can try and stay here. I can look at my thoughts, and I've been looking at my thoughts. I can try to, let them go, and I can try and accept the fear that is coming up and goes away, etc. And I realized, like, if you're saying this now, I realized that one of the things that happened was I deeply cared about my work. And the other thing is I felt scared of not being good enough in the things that I was doing. And when those two get mixed, then it's
that's a tricky cocktail, right? That's a tricky cocktail when they get mixed. Yeah. It's very interesting you mentioned that. I was talking to my students this weekend that I started my private practice maybe 12 years ago. And I was working in a university, running a training clinic. And the truth is that as much as I love supervising and coaching my students, the administrative work was killing me. It was too much administrative work. So I have to make this decision using ACT skills, looking at my values, to let go of this position in this university and start my private practice. And because I was starting something new, without any idea of how to do it, without any training, how to start a private practice or how to set a business or any business model, I was working really hard. And my students will come at the end of the day and they will say, Patricia, are you going to sleep? I'm like, I was so mad. I can't believe it. You're asking me this. This needs to be done. Who is going to do this? So my reaction was being very, very cranky because I deeply care about working with clients, about dealing with fear, because I know how ACT skills can be impactful, and because I care about creating this mom and pop's boutique therapy coaching practice. So I was really, really clear about what was important to me. But my fears of being a failure, my fears of things falling apart, pushed me to work harder and harder, hours and hours. And I did feel alienated with those messages, but with time, like you really tapping again, what am I chasing here? What is really driving this? And using ACT skills allow me once again to find my own rhythms, and to make room to say, okay, this is not about putting extra hours. This is about just acknowledging that the day has a certain amount of hours and my life have these other areas. In my life, I want to make time for my health and for exercises. I want to make time for my friendships. I want to make time for my spiritual life. But I didn't know. I did have to find my own rhythms, my trial and error. And every time I had to say no to working the extra hour, I have to grieve. I have to grieve that I was saying no to something I care, to say yes to something I also care. So I think when we're making these choices, it's not this easy thing because you're really literally, every time you say yes to something you care about, you're also saying no to something you care about. In my case, I had to say no to working the extra 3 hours or to giving this extra talk or participate in an extra project, things that I deeply care about. But I wanted to say yes to going for a hike with my friends or to put a dinner together. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the shift from trying to do things right and perfectly all the time to doing what works in the name of our values, it also requires that we grieve the choices we make. And we make room for that pain that comes, right? That when you're having this wonderful meal with your friends, then your mind says, oh my gosh, Patricia, you could be writing one extra chapter. And you take a deep breath and acknowledge, that's hard a little bit. And yet here I am, right? So giving ourselves permission to make those choices and notice the grief that may come, it is important to start discriminating. And the other thing that happens, and this is very interesting, is that, and sometimes my clients, we learn this by experience, is that the quality of our work and our performance is not necessarily defined by the number of hours we put. The quality of our performance is actually going to be much more improved if we give ourselves some time to rest and to pause, if we have some moments of reset, right? We think that by working that 90 hours, 80 hours, things are going to be outstanding. Let's see what happens when you actually are willing to perhaps work less and have more connection with your friends, and you go dancing or you go for a run or you spend half hour with your pet. See the quality of your work and check, if there's really a big difference, right? So I think we learn again to find our rhythms, and we learn that our work perhaps gets better and doesn't change, reduce the quality. Isn't that interesting? It's like a paradoxical effect in some way.
Yes, it is. And it's today in that meeting, it's funny. It's like you were there, because I've said a lot of stuff that you're telling me now as well. One of the things that I mentioned to them was, I started off saying, like, what if for the next 3 weeks, you will be moving into being the most perfect manager there can ever be, like really high level. So you need to change some things in the next 3 weeks. What will it be to get to that level? And many of them said, I need more time to think. I need more time to pause and to make a reflection on, where are we going? What am I doing? Do I still have an overview of what we're doing? I just really need that time. And when then I said, okay, so what does that mean? What will you be doing? How will you get to that point where you will really evolve? And then they started saying all these things that they usually do. Like one of them said, yes, I will pick a day in my schedule every week, one day in the next 3 weeks. And I said, and have you done that before? Yeah, I have. Okay, and does that work? No, it doesn't. Okay, so why are you repeating something that doesn't work? You know, the way that we struggle and we go into this circle of the same kind of solutions every time, again and again, and it just doesn't work. And I explained to them, like, the principle of being on a crossroad. If you cross this path of, I want some time, you know, to think, what will interfere? What will come up that makes you decide, nah, I don't need that day, I'll take it next week? And if you know that, if you really dive into what will get me off this route, I know that up front. And so every time I cross that, and I really know it, I'm on a crossroad, and I can choose to move forward to where I want to go, or do the same thing that I've always been doing. And at the end, I said, and what will happen if you we made it really concrete. What will happen if you go to doing that for 3 weeks? And they were like, I will feel more satisfaction. I will feel more self-assurance. I will, and I was like, isn't it strange how we always choose things to do again and again and again? And they make us exhausted, and they make us unsatisfied, and we keep doing it anyway.
It's a pattern, right? It's a pattern. You're tapping into something as you were sharing, Annick. One of the things that happens with perfectionistic action is that the decision-making process, it's a little bit tricky. I think what we know with the literature is that some people are maximizers and some people are satisficers, which basically, so this is a very interesting distinction, because
could you repeat that?
Yeah.
Like
that some people are maximizers and some people are satisficers. Which basically means that some people need to maximize and optimize every single decision they make. They have to have all the information. They have to research hundreds of times. They have to read all books, listen to all podcasts, because they're very invested in making the best decision. Some people are satisficers, and they will say, okay, I make the choice. I bought that coffee machine. I send this email. They don't need to have every single piece of information. The challenge when people are prone to duplicate a lot, they try to maximize a lot of their decisions. Every decision is to be the best. So in our work, sometimes we have to discriminate a little bit, right? Are we going to maximizing mode? Does this task or project requires that? Can we go into satisficing mode, right? When you think about also decisions, one of the things that lead people to chronic indecision is this fear of regret. Right? What if I make the wrong choice? Right? The fear of regret, or the fear of missing out. What if there is other options that are better? And then the way they manage this is by searching for more information, right? So acknowledging what is our decision criteria here, and checking, am I in satisficing mode or am I on maximizing mode? And this task still require that. So I think that could help in terms of really noticing our patterns, right? So we have this we face these crossroads or you are describing and respond to them as skillfully as possible, right? Really noticing what's my decision criteria here, what's my process to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find that very, very interesting because especially in the information era, given the amount of resources and options you have, right? If you want to buy a book on acceptance and commitment therapy, you may find today like, I don't know, 600 options. How do you choose which book you're going to buy? A person that has a maximizing tendency will read the bio of every single author, we look at reviews, we look at ratings, we may ask other people. A satisficer will say, well, I'm interested in trauma, I may get these 2-3 books, right? So for overachievers and overthink, it's important to distinguish, am I maximizing or am I going to satisficing mode? And when do I do which one of these processes? It doesn't have to be either or. You can play with these things. For some things, maximize your decision. For some things, make a satisfying decision, the good enough decision, and move on. Mm-hmm. If you decide to maximize your decision, then I will encourage people to set a time frame. Say, okay, by Monday next week, I'm going to make a choice with what I know, what the information I have, based on the input I got from people I talk to. This is very important to have a time frame because otherwise, in the mind of a person that deeply cares about things, the mind is going to tell you that it's never good enough, that you should keep searching more and more and more, right? So we have to put a little bit like a break for the mind and acknowledge that it's going to be humanly impossible to always have all the information for a decision we have to make. Let's research what's doable and put a pause.
I keep thinking about a few people that I'm seeing individually, and I can see how many of them are overachievers or overthinkers, and I keep crossing them and noticing that many of them don't really want to change that. How they don't link it to suffering, to feeling exhausted, to feeling anxious, because they're so focused on being successful, on succeeding in any part of their lives, that they don't connect the dots. And I think that's a shame, because there are leaders in the world who have very busy schedules and they feel okay and they don't feel pressured all the time. They just navigate through everything that they have to do. And then the overachievers are so putting pressure on themselves again and again and again and again, that it makes them underperform in a way. And that it's a shame, because usually it comes with a price of not seeing the family enough, because they're just out of sight. They're just forgotten until they come home, and then they're like, oh, didn't spend enough time here either, did I? So I was
That's true.
While you were talking, I was thinking about them and thinking of how can I help them feel that there is a different world out there, where if they choose to just step back a little bit and let go of control, because that's what it is, right?
That's right.
That they will experience more pleasure in the things that they're doing.
That's right. Yeah, I have encountered the same dynamic that you are describing. I think in the times that we're living, external accomplishments are very reinforced, right? People will praise us for the things that we do, the quality of our work, how our kids are behaving, how we're practicing sports, how many hours we're training. One of the things I have found helpful when people are not linking how all those external accomplishments and external reinforcement is contributing to their own suffering in other areas, is really ask ourselves, who am I without all this doing? Yeah. What's the feeling that comes when I'm not working harder and harder and pushing and pushing? Yeah. How does it feel without all the stuff that I do? What does my mind tell me about who am I, right? Well, how does it feel to tap in? Because I think when we tap into that, right, if we really unpack that feeling, who am I without all this doing, without this working harder and harder? How does it feel to really tap into that? I think what we will find is this fear of not being good enough, this fear of failing, and this really scary and uncomfortable experience that comes to us. And then we can map all the things that we do to manage that feeling. So I have found helpful when we can really tap, if you weren't working this extra hour, if this project wouldn't have go as you wanted to go, if you didn't give all these 25 talks that you gave last week, if your kid didn't look so impeccable with these wonderful, cute outfits, what will your mind tell you about who you are? How will that feel? I think tapping into these experiences is how we really can see, then acknowledge all the things we do to manage that, right? And also with that sensitivity, that clarifying that the goal is not to let go of all those strategies. The goal is to check when I can use them in the service of my values, when I have to, be careful because they're actually narrowing my life. Again, it's tapping into this discrimination. But yeah, I think that's been one of the ways in which I can tap a little bit in how these behaviors that may look benign on the outside and they get socially reinforced are actually causing suffering in other areas of our life. Yeah. Just in that way, by reflecting on those aspects, who am I without all this doing?
Oh, it reminds me of a conversation I had this week with this lovely, really amazing owner of a business. And I asked him, like, if I were to visit you on the inside, what would I see? What would, like, if you were made of glass and I could just look right through, what would I see? And two answers he gave me, I thought was very saddening. It was, one was, oh, but that is an idea that that makes me anxious. Wasn't the right words that he, but something along those lines. He said, it makes me anxious. It's troublesome. That's what he said. That would be troublesome if people can just look in. And I'm like, okay, but what would they see? And he said, I don't know. I have no idea what is on the inside, which is, of course, very logical if from a young age you've been practicing to overachieve, then you've learned to do a lot on the outside, but you have not done a lot of work on the inside. So you literally don't know yourself. You have no idea who the person is that you are making choices with every single day that are so important, that pull you away from your family, that damage your health, that I mean, you have no idea who that person is. That's
a beautiful question, Annick. That's a gorgeous question, right? What will I see? And the truth is that you're right. I think I have heard that from my clients. Sometimes I don't know. And then the work becomes about, can we learn? Can we learn together? Who is that person? Sadly, I think what I see sometimes is that when people learn to look within, there is a lot of loneliness. There is a lot of emptiness. And in some cases, there is a lot of hurt because of the relationship they have developed with themselves and the relationship with others. And I have found sometimes that when people are prone to being a high achiever or an overthinker, and they deeply care about what they are doing, there is also a lot of lost. A lot of loss of things that they deeply care, to be seen, to be loved, and to be accepted. But because all this noise that they are doing, right, with working extra harder and harder, always chasing an outcome, they miss aspects in their life. And I do believe that if people are courageous to learn active skills and to really do this courageous work of looking within and learn to make room for these fears, making mistake of not being good enough, lives can get better and richer and joyful. But I do think it's courageous to look into that place and to make this pivot in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally a place they've never visited a lot. And then it's like I'm scared. I don't want to go in there. I have reason to overachieve. It's the way that I've survived. So if you take that away from me, then I don't have like a shield, and I need the shield.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, that's very true what you're saying. For some people, it becomes like this survival thing, right? I have to do it this way because their mind is really anticipating a gloom and doom scenario. This will fail, my career will be over, my friendship will be over. Um, Again, part of the work is also acknowledging that our mind is very dynamic, especially in the case of overthinking overachievers. The mind will come with all types of stuff, right? Including predictions about the future, including predictions about our capacity to handle distress. Our task using diffusion skills and acceptance is to make room for these stories, for those feelings, and go back again to your values to make a decision, right? Because all these survival strategies, while they make sense and they are very valid, they are not context-based many times.
Yeah.
They are not context-based, right? And I think that with time, we don't we learn that by really letting it go of those standards a little bit and choosing our values or checking what I'm chasing. But let's acknowledge that the mind, of course, your mind will tell you that this is a matter of life or death. You have to do it better and better, right? But if you notice your dynamic mind and make room for that, you're going to be in better place to make choices that are context-based and values-based, given where you are in life versus what your mind tells you to do.
That's I'll explain a bit about the context base, because for us that's a normal language to use, but for many people
that's right,
not. So that means that when you make decisions, that they are probably habits that you've learned over the years, and that it's like something that you've learned in your past, in your teenage years, or longer ago than that overachieving, overthinking is a good way to handle stress, to find a place in the group that you're in, to find acceptance from your parents, etc. So staying stuck in that era of your life makes you basically say, as an adult, I'll keep repeating the same patterns that I learned when I was a kid or when I was a teenager to be accepted. But I forget that I'm not a teenager. I forget that I'm a grown up, and that I can make choices, and that I have a family, and that I have a body to take care of, and that nobody's taking care of me. I'll have to do it myself. And I want a full lived, values-based life. So if I want that, I need to go after it, and no one is going to do that for me.
That's right. That's right. So I think there is this difference between rules-based decisions and values-based decisions about context-based. As you were talking, one example that came to me is that a value of mine, like yours, is to disseminate active skills, right? I'm super passionate about it. The way I do that is by having conversations like this one, writing books, working with clients. Those are the three things that I do. During COVID, I got sick, and I literally had to shrink every single thing I was doing because I didn't have the energy to function 12 to 14 hours a day. My energy was like for 6-8 hours maximum. That was the context of my life. No matter how much I deeply care about teaching active skills and spreading the word on active skills, I could not do it because my body will make me feel, if I push half hour later, I will be having an awful migraine and exhausted. So a rules-based decision will be say yes to every presentation about ACT, say yes to every project about ACT because you deeply care. A context-based decision and a values-based decision was acknowledging that, yes, I do care about ACT, and yes, my body is telling me I cannot go beyond 8 hours right now. So I had to learn to say no to things that I deeply care about because the context was inviting me to make that choice, a very hard choice, and that's where the grieving comes. But rules-based decision is you just say yes to everything. You keep doing things as you have been doing for years, right? Automatically. And then in some way, your mind will tell you reasons, right? Because it's so familiar to keep doing that. But the context-based decision acknowledges the seasons of your life, makes room to where your body is, makes room to what's happening around you, right? So I think that that's the difference between these rules-based decisions and these context values-based decisions. And that requires, I think, a lot of humbleness sometimes, humbleness to just look what's really going on in our lives and inside and outside.
Yeah, humbleness and honesty. Like, where am I really? And am I fooling myself and saying, yeah, this is fun for me, or is it really not? And if you look into the now, then you can see what you're doing, and you actually shouldn't be doing that because there is something better for you to do. But of course, as you put it, and that's very important, the grief is there too. You will never be able to let go of all of these patterns if you're not willing to feel a little sad and maybe frustrated about letting go of certain choices in order to be able to build your richer life. It's just how it goes.
Yeah. That is true, right? I think living joyful, rich, and meaningful lives requires to make room for these uncomfortable feelings like the sadness, the disappointment, the fear of disappointment others, the fears of making mistakes. But I do think that, at least in my experience, I didn't have the skills to do that before. It all came to me through ACT when I have to make room for my own stories, my own fears of not being good enough, my own proneness to overwork, my own fears of loneliness. When I start using ACT skills, right, and I start doing more of my values, I think that life have a very different flavor for me. I think ACT in some way has really transformed my life and my career because I didn't know how to sit with my own discomfort before. I would have been one of those persons that I was an okay person. I had a good life. But I don't think I knew myself in the way that I know myself. And of course today, and it's not over, but I do think that process of really tapping in, looking within, without hiding myself through stories that my mind tells me.
Yeah, exactly.
And learning to make room for all the fun and exciting things, but also for the pain. That capacity by itself can be so transformative.
Yeah.
And once you start living that, there's no way you go back to the old ways. Because every time you make this values-based choice, life has a different flavor. And every values-based choice keeps adding up. And then when I look back to other ways in which I was, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can experience life in a very different way these days because of these ACT skills and because of what you are describing, Annick, making room for the sadness, the pain, the sorrow that comes as part of our lives.
Yes, very true. Okay. I think we need to end the conversation here since that is just a very beautiful end.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
Thank you for learning, well, sharing all of these insights. It's really been insightful for me as well, and I'm sure many people who are listening will also recognize how they're making choices in their lives and how they can best, move forward. I'm sure it will be useful for many people. So thank you very, very much for making the time.
Well, I have to say, Annick, that it was very special to connect with you. As I said at the beginning, and I don't want to stop saying this, I'm very inspired by the work you're doing. I really welcome more opportunities to learn more. And I am super appreciative that we have a chance to chat about what perfectionism is, how people can use some ACT skills, and I hope we can do many more times in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much.